We live in a secular culture. A lot of people think that believing in God, in Jesus, is like believing in fairies. It's all just a myth without any real evidence.
But actually, the scientific and historical evidence suggests there is a God, and that Jesus was the Son of God.
So, this is our video to explain why we believe in Jesus. The scientific evidence for God, the historical evidence for Jesus and his resurrection, and our own personal evidence, our testimonies.
Did you know that some of the most famous scientists in history were Christians? Sir Isaac Newton, the renowned physicist and mathematician who set out the laws of gravity, and Gregor Mendel, known as the father of modern genetics, to name just two.
And one of the reasons these scientists are Christians because there's just so much scientific evidence for there being an intelligent creator of our universe, a God.
First of all, the Big Bang. If there was a starting point for our universe where nothing suddenly became historical, you have to ask, what or who caused that Big Bang?
Then there's the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the conditions of the universe and Earth are just right for there to be life, suggests that there has to be an intelligent designer.
And what about the complexity of that life? For example, DNA.
Yeah, the information in DNA contains the instructions for building and maintaining living organisms. We have to ask whether this complexity is beyond what could have occurred randomly.
Also, there's our innate sense of what is right and wrong. The fact that we have objective moral values, that there's a universal sense of right and wrong, suggests that there is higher moral authority that gave mankind its values.
A lot of people think that Jesus is just a legend, like King Arthur, that there's no proof he actually existed. But actually, there's so much historical evidence for the existence of a man named Jesus, who claimed to be the Son of God and was crucified.
First of all, there are the biblical accounts of Jesus' life, the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These four books talk about Jesus' life and teachings and contain eyewitness accounts of his sermons and miracles.
Yeah, and they were first written and shared between 30 and 70 years after Jesus' crucifixion. And so many of the people who feature in the books, the people who met and were healed by Jesus, would have still been alive to challenge what was written if it wasn't true.
And so, with the people who witnessed his miracles, if those miracles didn't happen, people would have spoken up to challenge the books.
Now, a lot of people might say, but the Bible is a religious book. What about evidence outside the Bible?
Well, a lot of renowned non-Christians recording events at the time mention Jesus and his miracles and claim to be the Messiah, like Josephine and Tacitus, to name just two.
But perhaps the strongest historical evidence for Jesus is how rapidly Christianity spread following his crucifixion. The faith exploded from the hundreds of people who met Jesus during his life on earth to the now 2.6 billion Christians worldwide. All those people say Jesus is real and is really the Son of God.
You may be thinking, okay, so there's a lot of historical evidence for the existence of Jesus and that he was crucified. But that doesn't mean he's the Son of God.
For him to actually be the Son of God, he'd have to have done what he said he would do, come back to life after being crucified. And surely there's no actual historical evidence for that, because people don't come back from the dead, right?
But there actually is a lot of historical evidence that the resurrection of Jesus did happen. And it's not just the accounts recorded in the Bible.
Renowned historians who were alive when Jesus was crucified, such as Tacitus and Thallus, recorded his death by crucifixion, and that there was an earthquake and eclipse when he was crucified, which backs up what the four Gospels say.
But what about the people who say that Jesus didn't actually die when he was crucified? That he just passed out and woke up after his body was taken away by his followers?
Well, here we have to turn to the accounts of the crucifixion in the Bible and remember what he said earlier about how the Gospels can be seen as eyewitnesses, accounts of real events.
The Gospels record that a Roman soldier stabbed a spear into Jesus' ribs and blood and water spurted out. A sign that he was dead.
Yeah, the Romans knew how to kill someone through crucifixion. Nobody ever survived.
Okay, so there's evidence that Jesus was crucified and that he died on the cross. But what about evidence for him coming back to life 3 days after he was killed?
Again, we can turn to the Bible for this. There are loads of accounts of him appearing to his disciples after his death. In fact, in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthian church, Paul writes that Jesus appeared to more than 500 of his brothers and sisters at the time, most of whom were still living, though some had fallen asleep.
Yeah, and that letter was written just 10 years after Jesus was crucified and resurrected. So surely some of the people in that crowd of 500 would have challenged what Paul said if it wasn't true.
But perhaps the most crucial evidence of Jesus' resurrection being real is who he appeared to first after he was raised from the dead, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, because back in those days, a woman's testimony didn't count legally. It was a sexist culture and women were seen as unequal to men.
Exactly. If Jesus' resurrection wasn't true, and it was just a story made up by his followers in order to start a fake religion, they definitely wouldn't have chosen a woman who's a former prostitute to be the first person to see him alive. They would have chosen someone who was deemed important in that culture.
Which makes you think the account of Jesus' resurrection is true.
Yeah. When I think of God, I think of nature. God runs through all of nature, the trees, the wind, even the earth, the roots. It runs through all of it, and it just means so much to me because I love nature. Walking through it just gives me a sense of mind, peace. I just think, wow, he did that. That was God. That was the person I follow.
Like, when I think of God, I just think about like a friend, about like he's a friend, he's a father, he's everything. And when you're in the dark place, when there comes a time when you just don't have anyone, when people are around you but you just don't feel that they are with you, and that's when God steps in. When like you need someone to talk to and you need some guidance, that's where he is. Even if you don't want to talk to him and you just want to stay there, he will stay with you. And it's really beautiful how God just changes your life, how something bad happens and then something just happens and then you know that it's God who like filled your heart, who like overwhelmed you and just, just loves you. You know that someone loves you out there, and it's just really great.
So for me, God really just kind of means that, he's God, he is always there and he is around us, he is within us, he sits beside us, he is always there and he works within our lives. And I genuinely believe that he will use us to do his will and to spread his word and to spread the love of Jesus. And that's something I really genuinely believe in and something that I have found with my faith and my journey because, I've grown up in this church and I've had this experience of living a Christian life my entire life. But actually, the point where I really found God was probably during COVID when I was stuck at home and I couldn't get out and I could, I was just sat there and there wasn't really anything to do. And I found myself really contemplating actually, why am I here? What am I doing? What is my purpose? And I realised that actually my purpose is just to do God's will and to spread his love and to be an example of how God is forgiving and how he is loving and how he's amazing. And I really found that from the fact that as a church, we do so much for the community. During COVID, we were doing food parcels. We were supporting local people. We were supporting the community. And I really got that sense of actually, what I'm doing here is not a chore. It's not something that I'm just being forced to do because my parents have gone to this church for 20 years. Actually, this is something that I I'm here to do because God loves me and because he really wants me to do that. And that's what I genuinely believe. And I think really that is what God is to me. He is compassionate, he's patient, he is kind, he is loving, and he loves every person in our lives. He loves everyone. And that's really who God is to me.